Hello and welcome to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a program about fascinating people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. This week's episode is about Kornelius Herman Neufeld, more commonly known by his initials KH. He became known as the Wandering Conductor and had a profound impact on Mennonite choral singing here in Canada.
There they were sitting, and the Queen, she saw me. And she looked at me, and she said, "Hi, KH." Well, we roared, you know.
Of course.
We roared.
That was well-known Manitoba conductor George Wiebe, remembering the musical legacy of K.H. Neufeld. Music and culture broadcaster Eric Friesen interviewed George Wiebe about K.H. in 2023. We'll be hearing more from George in a few minutes. K.H. was born in 1892 in South Imperial Russia with a passion for music. As a young man, he traveled to study engineering at Moscow University, but didn't let go of his love of music. While at university, K.H. also studied voice at the Moscow Conservatory, conducted a college choir, and sang in the professional Simon Opera Chorus. K.H. graduated from Moscow University in 1918 and went back to South Imperial Russia, where he became the chief engineer of a manufacturing operation. He married Susie Neufeld in 1919. A few years later, in 1923, the couple left the Soviet Union for Canada. They were among the first Mennonites in what would become a mass migration out of the Soviet Union throughout the 1920s. K.H. and Susie came to Winnipeg first, where K.H. worked for a short time as a printer for the Rundschau, the German-language newspaper. In 1924, the couple settled in Winkler. K.H. established a small printing business to pay the bills, but as always, he remained devoted to music. Although he loved music dearly, K.H. was not a particularly gifted musician. He played the cello, but not especially well. His real gifts lay in organizing and promoting music, which he did with enthusiasm. He also energetically encouraged young musicians and often offered them opportunities to accompany his choirs. Upon arriving in Winkler, he promptly set about organizing choirs, the first of which was the Immigrantenchor, or the Immigrant Choir, made up of recently arrived Russian Mennonites. He went on to organize and direct numerous local choirs, Bergthaler Church choirs in Winkler and Altona, and the Winkler Male Voice Choir. The Winkler Male Voice Choir, which K.H. organized in 1935, became one of his most well-known choirs. Under his leadership, the Winkler Male Voice Choir frequently performed beyond Winkler, often in non-Mennonite churches as well as on the Winnipeg radio station CJRC. K.H. is also known for his role in organizing choral festivals known as Zangerfests. Prior to his arrival on the scene, the Mennonite Collegiate Institute in Gretna regularly held a Schulfest, where the school choir was accompanied by local singers. But in 1928, under K.H.'s initiative, choirs from numerous other towns converged on Gretna, transforming the Schulfest into a full-scale Zangerfest. The Gretna event was the beginning of K.H.'s Zangerfest legacy. In 1932, he established the Southern Manitoba Music Festival. He wrote letters to Mennonite newspapers, local and national, relentlessly promoting the values of musical competitions. But people didn't go to choral festivals just for the music. At least, not if K.H. was involved. He was known not only for his conducting and leadership skills, but also for his gregarious and flamboyant personality. He was a natural storyteller with a flair for theatrics. Music and culture broadcaster Eric Friesen interviewed George Wiebe about K.H. in 2023. George is a highly respected conductor himself, and in that interview, he shared some memories of K.H. Here's one of George's recollections about K.H. and Zangerfest.
Describe what I would call a kind of classic Zangerfest.
Well, I think people would come early if K.H. Neufeld was directing. Yeah,
he was a draw.
He drew, an amazing capacity to mesmerize and to draw. And so the anticipation was great. People would make sure that they had a place, And so there was a lot of moving about and looking for the right place to sit. And then when everybody was seated, then you did the choir, including the choir. K.H. Neufeld would not have appeared with the choir. He would wait till choir was settled, until the audience was in place, and then he'd wait his moment. I mean, this is timing like you would do in Hollywood. Yeah.
K.H. drew crowds, that's for sure. In 1938, Winkler had its biggest Zangerfest yet. K.H. conducted 450 singers in front of an audience of nearly 5,000. It wasn't just dramatic timing that drew crowds to K.H. and his concerts. Year after year, people came to hear K.H.'s stories, often the same ones. He certainly had his favorites. Here's George Wiebe again with a delightful impression of K.H.'s storytelling.
The entertainment factor was huge. It added so much to the total embracing of the whole experience, and so we waited for this master storyteller, natural storyteller, K.H., to tell us the stories, and he was the only conductor that I've ever known, or for that matter, another public speaker who could talk about himself and not feel embarrassed in any way or self-conscious. Tell your story. You know, this happens when the choir needs a little break. He senses it immediately. Tell your story. And then by that time, it was like a mother having her children ready to listen to. And Don, what happens then? I dreamt I had a wonderful dream. I dreamt I was in heaven. We had a big choir, 1,000 sopranos, 1,000 altos, 1,000 tenors, and one bass. The choir was singing. Suddenly the conductor stopped the choir and said, "Bass too loud, pipe down." Guess who the bass was? It was K.H. Yeah, we could hear that story somewhere else, another year. But of course, he did have other stories to tell. Or in the mid-50s, I was in Saskatoon, and we had this wonderful lady who became Queen Elizabeth, and she and Prince Philip were coming through Saskatoon in a limousine, open limousine. And Walter Thiessen and I, we stood at the corner and watched them come by. There they were sitting, and the Queen, she saw me. And she looked at me, and she said, "Hi, K.H." Well, we roared, you know.
Of course.
We roared.
By the 1930s, K.H.'s name was well known in Manitoba. And by the 1940s, K.H. was traveling to work with choirs from Ontario to British Columbia, as well as in the United States. This work earned him the nickname the Wandering Conductor because he rarely stayed in one place for very long. Upon arriving somewhere, K.H. prepared choirs and musicians for a performance in short order, and once that was done, he was on to a new location. In 1944, the Manitoba Mennonite Youth Organization embarked on an ambitious project to elevate choral singing in the province. To this end, the youth organization appointed 2 conductors. One was John Conrad, who would be responsible for serving congregations in northern Manitoba. The other conductor, to serve southern Manitoba, was K.H. Neufeld. For K.H., the new youth organization position was a way to get paid for what he was already doing, traveling from community to promote and organize musical programs. Although he had his printing business in Winkler and tuned pianos on the side, K.H. never enjoyed financial security. He often relied on his income from the youth organization, which in turn relied on offering plate donations from audiences. The Manitoba Mennonite Youth Organization program was also an opportunity for organizing on an even bigger scale. The first year of the program was a busy one, but it paid off. In the summer of 1945, the efforts of K.H. Neufeld and John Conrad resulted in a huge Zangerfest in Winnipeg. Choirs from all over combined into a mass choir of 800 singers, accompanied by a 30-piece string orchestra, as well as a band from Steinbach. The audience, which was over 4,000 people, sang hymns in 4-part harmony. It was a day that was remembered for years. K.H. held his position at the youth organization until 1956, shortly before his death from cancer in 1957. During this time, he composed his own choral music. He published 4 cantatas, the first of which appeared in 1952. Titled An die Jugend, or To the Youth, it may have been in part a response to the tragic accidental death of his son Corny in 1946. Here is an undated excerpt of another cantata by K.H., titled Am Meerstrand, or At the Seashore. What you are about to hear originates from a vintage wire recording that was transferred to cassette tapes in the 1980s and subsequently digitized in 2024. Nature was one of K.H.'s favorite musical themes, and he prized emotional connection with the audiences above all else. In fact, K.H. wasn't known for having particularly complex arrangements or particularly skilled choirs. He often prepared choirs for performances on extremely short notice. But he is remembered for communicating intense feeling. Here's another memory from George Wiebe.
K.H. Was primarily concerned in immediate involvement, and that you feel something about the songs, and it gets to, and then that you communicate that the audience would be embraced, touched.
So the emotional aspect.
Yeah, the emotional aspect.
The feeling.
K.H. was not the only choral conductor of his time to have a significant impact on Mennonite choral singing. But his unrelenting enthusiasm for music was infectious, and his flair for the dramatic had a unique influence on the community. His efforts to organize choirs, workshops, and festivals across Canada, but especially in Manitoba, played a big part in making Mennonite choral singing what it is today. Photos of K.H. Neufeld and his choirs, as well as scores for his original music, are held at the Mennonite Heritage Archives. To see some of these images online or to listen to this episode again, visit mharchives.ca. If you have questions or comments about this program, email us at info@mharchives.ca. Join us again next week for a special Christmas feature. I'll be reading Gerhard Entz's story set in 1875 called The First Christmas in Canada, translated from the original Low German.
Thanks for listening to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives. I'm Conrad Stace, the archivist at the MHA. This program is made possible through support from Golden West Radio and listeners like you. If you want to support this program and the work of the archives, you can find out how to do that on our website at mharchives.ca and click on Support.
I'm your host, Dan Dick. This episode was researched by Kaylee Dick, Conrad Stace, and me, and was written by Kaylee Dick. Thanks to George Wiebe and Eric Friesen for their contributions to K.H. Neufeld's story. Thanks also to the Center for Mennonite Brethren Studies for providing recordings of K.H.'s music. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will return next week with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.